You're watching Street Signs, navigating the business of Wall Street, Washington, and the world.
So, is a home buyer walking away from an underwater mortgage a smart business decision, just like companies do all the time? Or is it a calculated scheme to milk the system and live rent-free for as long as possible, use your mortgage payment for something else? A lot of people are very passionate on both sides of this. Shari Olefson is an attorney with Fowler, Boggs, and the author of Foreclosure Nation, Mortgages and the American Dream. Chad Rule is an attorney and co-founder of You Walk Away, an organization that's walked tens of thousands of Americans through the foreclosure process. So let's start with you, Chad. Can you make the case for why walking away from a mortgage, even when you can technically afford it at this time, is not an unethical thing to do? Why it would make sense?
Well, it's a business decision. You know, people entered into an agreement, a promise with the bank to pay their mortgage, but if they didn't, then the bank could take the property back. So they took collateral in it, and they also hedged their bet because they have interest rates with these loans, and look at it from a business decision that they're not making their payment, whether it's a strategic default or it's based on necessity, then the bank gets the property back.
All right, so you're saying even if people can afford, if the value of the assets changed, it's basically just like a company that would renegotiate its debt?
Sure. I mean, we're not talking about credit card debt where people are going and spending the money on things. This is an agreement between a homeowner and a bank. They took out a mortgage on a property that is collateralized by the bank, and the bank's lost out in this case. The market value's dropped, and it's unfortunate, but the banks are going to have to take that loss.
Shari? Make sense, or just completely off the mark?
I think you know what I'm going to say. There are two components to this. The first, obviously, is the ethical issue, and the second is, as Chad referred to, the business issue. The third piece, though, is information that's out there for people, and something that viewers need to remember is that just as there were mortgage brokers selling us loans that weren't appropriate for us, so are there companies selling us services like this that may or may not be accurate information providers and appropriate. In terms of the ethical piece, Aaron, anyone who thinks that they can walk away and no one's harmed except for the bank is wrong. Your neighbors, it's just flat out wrong. Your neighbors' home prices are going to be affected by your foreclosure sale price, and the cost of borrowing is going to go up sky high for all of us. But on top of that, the business reasons are different by state. In a state like California, for example, which is a non-recourse state, you may be able to walk away, but only a handful of states are non-recourse. So in most states, you may have a ticking time bomb deficiency judgment. You may have an income tax hit. The cost of borrowing goes up. The cost for your credit goes up. It's not that simple.
Right, and it's interesting, of course, in Bill Bush passed, a lot of the penalties you would take on the tax side were sort of put on hold, which is something I'm sure he didn't think about when he did that. Chad, can I ask you about something Shari raised, though, when she said it hurts other people's values in your neighborhood? That appears to be what's different than when a company goes and renegotiates or does a strategic default. That you are doing something to the rest of your neighborhood.
Sure. I mean, there's a social impact. That's one of the arguments against walking away. But then should we take that and put it on the homeowner, that they have to keep their home just so that their neighborhood's values stay intact? I don't think so.
Well, if they have the income and they can afford to pay it, what logic is there to not pay it?
I don't think it's the responsibility of the homeowner to do that. They're walking away from the property because it doesn't make sense financially. It should be the banks that have to reduce the value of the home, reduce the principal. I think if banks were more willing to reduce principal, then we'd be in a much better position.
Shari?
People wouldn't be strategically defaulted.
Chad raises a good point, and it's very easy in this climate to rationalize and say that every single bank is bad and every borrower was an innocent victim harmed by their bank. But we all know the truth to that. And the fact is that there are banks out there that are being harmed just as badly as homeowners. The fact is that if you walk away from your homes, I mean, what's next? If you're going to look at your mortgage strictly as a financial decision, then you might as well go out and rob a jewelry store, because you know what? On paper, that makes a lot of sense too.
She raises an interesting point, Chad. I mean, how do you respond to that? I mean, once you cross the ethical line, it gets blurrier and blurrier, doesn't it?
You're comparing a robber to a homeowner that is looking at a financial decision. If we talk about these poor banks, the banks, as I said, they hedge their bet in interest rates. And if you look at state-specific interest rates, there's about 8 states where it's easier to walk away or to get out of deficiencies. And in those states, the banks have higher interest rates. So it's almost like an insurance against something like this happening.
All right. Well, thanks very much.
Well,
I'm sorry, Shari.
The bottom line is you need to be...
Okay, thank you, Shari and Chad. Apologies for that. We appreciate the conversation. A lot of heated response from our viewers. We'll follow up on that. We're at session highs right now, just off them. We're up 160 now, up about 1.